Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today, in the spirit of Halloween, we're doing something a little different than our weekly true crime episodes. It feels like a good way to kind of still stick to our true crime genre, but also discuss something that I personally think is a pretty good Halloween-esque watch. So, for this week's episode, we're doing a review of Killer Legends, a documentary that you can watch on YouTube. Here's a quick synopsis from IMDb. Quote, delving into our collective nightmares, this horror documentary investigates the origins of our most terrifying urban legends and the true stories that may have inspired them. This is going to be relatively conversational and full of spoilers, so if you haven't watched Killer Legends yet and don't want to be spoiled, then we suggest watching it first and coming back to this episode after you've finished it. Otherwise, let's begin. Okay, so to start it off, the IMDb rating on this documentary is a 6.2, which I thought was a little low going into it, but John and I are also review snobs, so we tend to not watch much that has ratings under a 6.5.
I mean, it's not a hard cutoff, but, slim pickings when it comes to documentaries that focus on true crime but are kind of Halloween-y. So, concessions are made.
Yeah, definitely. But I also think, people are freaking harsh when they review documentaries.
I mean, we're harsh too, though.
But, this is also real life, and people, shit on people's real life stuff, too. I'm like...
Well, I mean, when people make movies, that's a real-life act to make a movie.
I guess. I don't know. Some people are just really harsh critics. I used to be, one of those people that's like, oh, I'll give everything a 5 out of 5. And now I'm like, no.
You're the type when you go out to dinner, and the waiter comes over, and you have not been impressed with your meal, and they're like, oh, how was your meal? And you're like, oh, my God, it was fantastic. It was so good.
Because I don't like confrontation. That's
and I'm like,
why.
It was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't think 6.2 is terrible.
No, it's not. I think anything above a 6 is better than average.
Yeah.
So.
But again, it's a documentary, too, so it may be pulling in a certain type of crowd. I don't know where this originated as far as, where it was released. If it was, straight to YouTube, or if people had to search for it, or how people even... happened upon it. We were looking for something to review in a Halloween vein. So, but I think 6.2 is still fine. I've watched many a 6.2 movies and enjoyed them before.
Yeah, same.
But now we've become more snobby, and it's like, oh, we'll watch a trailer. The trailer looks, that looked interesting, and then we'll look it up on IMDb, and it'll be like a 3.7, and you'll be like, I'm not watching that.
Yeah, I won't watch anything that's like a 3.7. I remember, what was that show we put on the other day?
Hey, Vampires Suck. That has a terrible rating. But it's funny because it's not meant to be good.
Because it's parody.
Right.
And that's what makes it good. But anyway.
This is not parody, but I wasn't turned off by the
low rating.
Yeah.
So Killer Legends is about 4 different urban legends that have been around for decades. The creators dove into each one and attempted to link the true stories that may have had some influence or connection to them. So I'll start. The first urban legend examined is called The Hook. Now, at first glance, this really wasn't an urban legend that I was familiar with. I hadn't even heard of The Hook. I had no idea what that was. And then once the creators were like, oh, Lover's Lane murders, I instantly put 2 and 2 together.
Right. When you say Lover's Lane, I know what you're going for. But when they said The Hook, the first thing that came to my mind was the Robin Williams movie Hook.
Oh,
where it was Peter Pan.
Yeah, mine was Peter Pan. I'm like, is there an urban legend surrounding Peter Pan? I was totally confused. And then the second they said Lover's Lane, it was right there in my brain. It just popped up and I knew what they were talking about.
Right.
Now, there are multiple variations of this legend, but the gist of The Hook is that a young couple goes to a Lover's Lane type area to, do things that couples do. And as they're... You're an ass. And as they're doing these things that couples do, there's supposedly this urgent message sent over the radio about a crazed psychopath with a hook for a hand, aka the Hook Man, that had just escaped from a nearby insane asylum. The legend goes that the boy isn't scared and wants to continue hanging with his lady friend, but she's far too frightened by the news bulletin and wants to leave.
One-track mind.
Honestly. Why are all husbands the same and/or boyfriends?
It's
we were
so
just talking about
strange,
this.
like when I'm mindlessly browsing through Instagram and I see all these things where a wife is like, when I'm folding clothes or when I take my sock off, and a husband comes in and does something that husbands do.
Yes,
I'm
exactly.
like, okay, I'm not alone.
No, you're not, and neither am I. Thank God there are other women that deal with this.
Yeah.
But anywho, after the two lovers have like this quick spat, they decide that they will head out and quickly drive away from the area. Then, once the teens arrive home and get out of the car, they see that there's a hook attached to the side of their car, with them realizing they narrowly escaped the clutches of the hook man.
Now, in the documentary, they show a clip from what I think is a movie, because I'm pretty sure James Marsden was in the clip that they showed.
Oh, okay.
But I have no idea what it is.
What movie it is?
Let me look it up, see if I can find it. Do you know who James Marsden is?
I feel like I might, but I'm also not good with useless information. Oh, what's his face
Cyclops from X-Men.
Oh, no. No, I was thinking from Westworld. I know what that is from X-Men.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, I know X-Men.
I know, but would you have known if I said, oh, the actor that played Cyclops in X-Men?
Probably not, no, because he
so.
had like a weird one eye. His eye was covered. How would I recognize him?
Well, both of his eyes were covered.
Yes. He's got an eye patch that just shoots out a laser. The other one's normal.
Let's see. This must be like an 80s movie, I assume. Could it be Boogie's Diner?
I don't know.
Definitely not. I don't know, because now we're going into the 90s, and that looked like an older movie.
It did look like an older movie. I don't remember seeing
Campfire?
him. I don't remember seeing him.
Okay, I bet that's what this is. So actually, one of my coworkers, you know the one.
Oh, I know the one, the Halloween obsessed one.
Yes.
That's the one. She's got everything.
Yeah.
If you're listening, hey.
She told me about a movie called Campfire Tales.
Uh-huh.
And that is a group of teens entertain themselves by telling an anthology of famous urban legends with a modern twist.
I'm going to have to watch this now.
And we're going to have to watch that and do a review on it, but James Marsden stars in it. So they must have been talking about the hook.
Okay, all right. That makes sense. So just to keep going with the legend, it appears as though this particular one came to be sometime in the 1950s, and it spread quickly. But of course, the creators of Killer Legends wanted to dig into any real-life cases to see if they could find a Lover's Lane-type murder that inspired it, and lo and behold, they did. So the Moonlight Murders in Texarkana in 1946 were seemingly what brought this urban legend of the hook to life. So before John and I kind of dive in and give our opinions and thoughts on certain aspects of things that were mentioned in the documentary, I want to give you some brief details about the Moonlight Murders. Do you know how hard it was for me to like not dive deep into these two, to just try and get like a glossy overview of this? I was like, I just want to like get every detail and write an entire script on this, but it was like so hard to cut it down because obviously that would be like a 14-hour episode and no one wants that. But
Right. I mean, in the vein of doing a review on a documentary, we really should stick to what was done in the documentary.
Yeah.
They talk about the Moonlight Murders and they don't go super deep into them, but all they're saying is that these happened. They may have a connection to the urban legend or some type of association.
Yeah, exactly.
That's something that I'll get into when I talk about mine. It's like, these didn't create that urban legend. It's just like, oh, these happened around this time and, you know, rumors spread and people try to make these connections.
Yeah, like, is it an odd coincidence that this, you know, came about within 5 to 10 years of when these crimes happened?
Right.
Or, you know, were there other ones or something like that? But, like, these are the ones that are touched on in the documentary. So, you know, we didn't want to not at least give you a background and give them their, you know,
their time to be heard about.
Exactly.
And then if people want to know more about them and they wanted us to do an episode on them or whatever, sure, that's fine. Or if it's something they find interesting and they want to look on their own, they'll at least have a good starter with what you're given.
Yeah. So from February to May of 1946, in both Texarkana, Texas and Texarkana, Arkansas, as they both like border the lines of each state, there were 4 separate instances of violence. And I say instances of violence because not all of the individuals who were targeted by the now dubbed Phantom Killer were killed. So the first attack was on February 22nd, 1946, with the Phantom Killer attacking 25-year-old Jimmy Hollis and 19-year-old Mary Jean LeRae. which I believe is how you pronounce it, well, they were stopped off the side of the road in a seemingly secluded Lover's Lane type area. The attacker came after the pair and beat Jimmy in the head, I believe with the butt of his gun, and then proceeded to sexually assault Mary. Despite their injuries, both Mary and Jimmy survived the attack. Now, just a minute ago, I mentioned that their attacker had been dubbed the Phantom Killer. And interestingly enough, it seems as though he was given this name because these two victims, Jimmy and Mary, survived, and they would go on to explain that the man that attacked them wore this hooded mask over his face, and thus the Phantom Killer was born. The next two attacks took place in both March and April, roughly 3 weeks apart from each other. On March 24th, Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore were killed, again after they'd gone to a Lover's Lane area, and same thing with these next two victims on April 14th. Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker were killed. From what I can tell, it appeared as though the Phantom Killer's MO was to find his victims, who all were male-female couples, in a vulnerable state while spending time in a Lover's Lane area. He would stealthily creep up on them, attack the man, and then sexually assault the woman, and all of the victims that ended up dying were killed by gunshot wounds to the head. Now, the last attack took place on May 3rd, this time, though, at a farmhouse, not in a secluded Lover's Lane area. The first victim at the house that was killed was Virgil Starks. His wife, Katie Starks, was actually shot in the face, but she miraculously survived the attack. During this time frame, in the early spring and summer months, Texarkana was shocked and terrified by the Moonlight murders, and the town was on edge. There had been at least one good suspect over the years, though, but he was never tried or convicted. His name was Ewell Sweeney, and he had a pretty rough criminal history, but his main thing seemed to be car theft. And he actually ended up in prison for life for being a habitual offender. However, from what I can tell, it seems as though he got out at some point, but later died in a nursing home. There was also supposedly one other person who could have looked good for the crimes, but he later killed himself, but had left behind a suicide note with a confession to the Moonlight murders in it. Either way, though, even with multiple potential people that made their way onto police's radar over the years, the Moonlight murders remain unsolved over 76 years later. So the murders took place in the 40s, and then the legend of the hook became prevalent in the 50s. Obviously, like John and I were saying a little bit earlier, it could have been this case. It could have been other cases that created the legend, but it seems like this one was, I guess, the most legit. And one of the biggest things that seemed to come from this legend in general that, the creators of this documentary talked about was the fact that the legend of the hook became like this warning for teens to not have sex. They'd be like, oh, you better not go out there and fornicate in...
Fornicate, I bet that's what they were saying at their house, too.
I bet they were.
You better not go fornicate with that gentleman.
They probably used the word fornicate or coitus.
Definitely not coitus. I think that was only popularized after Big Bang Theory.
Probably. But if they went to this Lover's Lane area to have sex or do whatever, they're like, oh, the hook man's going to get you. Like, it's wicked fucked up to say, but it's like, it's true. It's like what this legend was created for almost.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the legend was created by an attack or something like that. I'm more thinking that somebody came up with this to try to, scare young teens and adolescents and stuff out of those more adult behaviors that were frowned upon, especially back in those days.
Oh, definitely. Like having sex when you're not married or teenage pregnancy, all of those things. Like, this is the 40s.
Right.
It's like, you better not be out there doing that.
Right. And I think that might be the case, like, with a lot of these going forward. A lot of these urban legends that were at least covered, or most of these urban legends that were covered in this documentary.
Yeah.
It's a cautionary tale to say, don't do this, or else this is going to happen.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I'm sure like one parent said it to their kids and then it like spiraled and then other parents were talking about it like, oh, I told so-and-so that they shouldn't do this because of the hook ban, and then...
Or some random thing could have happened. Some attack could have happened and then somebody just built this story around it. But
things spread like wildfire. They really do.
Right. But now that we do have like these murders that occurred, all having to do with the victims being, male-female couples. Most of them having to do with them being parked on Lover's Lane areas, making out, having sex, whatever.
Yep.
It makes you wonder, like, we'll get into this more later on, but did this Phantom Killer know about this legend and use that kind of as inspiration to go after these people? Or was this somebody that really frowned upon what these individuals were doing and attacked them for that reason? And then because of where those people were at the time that they were attacked, these murders and attacks got attached to the legend.
Yeah.
It's like they're not synonymous with another, but they're pretty close in saying, you know, this is the urban legend. These are the attacks. You lay them over top each other.
Yep.
There's a lot of similarities there. So this is one of the real life examples that they attach to a legend that I like. I say, okay, yes, you can attach this legend to these attacks.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. So within this documentary, they not only, you know, told the stories, explained how the legend was kind of created, how people talked about it, all that, but they also tied different things into it, kind of like media. And it's funny because this was obviously the first one that they discussed in the documentary. And like in my brain, as we were learning about all these different things, I was like, the amount of times that this trope has been used in film, in TV shows, constantly, is like wild to me. So one of the ones that they brought up specifically was based on the Moonlight Murders.
A movie,
yes. And that was The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which I hear it's a cult classic, so I'm sure probably a lot of people listening have seen it. But basically, let me start from like 3 nights ago. So John and I sat down and we wanted to watch a Halloween movie. It's spoopy season. It's what we do. And we were just like browsing on Hulu or something, and the new Town That Dreaded Sundown came up, the one from like 2014. So then I was like, oh, wait, we just watched that documentary and they were mentioning the original one, which is from 1977. And I was like, well, can we find the original one? Let's just watch that. And then, you know, we could also watch the newer one, compare, whatever.
It'd be good for this episode because then we can reference, you know, seeing the movie that was referenced in the documentary. And
exactly.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So then we go to YouTube, which weird that all these things are available on YouTube, but we have YouTube Premium. So if anybody out there doesn't have it, highly suggest. It's wonderful. No ads. But anyway, so we go to YouTube and the movie's on there and we put it on and we got about 8 minutes into this film before I was like, you need to shut this off because this is probably the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. And I'm very sorry to offend anyone that's listening if you love this movie, but I was not a fan. And I
think the biggest problem, and I know this is a review on the documentary and not the movie, but the biggest problem that we both recognized without even saying it to each other was that there were audio portions.
Yes.
There were audio clips that were happening in the movie that were just focused on or left in frame for far too long.
Yeah.
Like women screaming and
ambulance siren.
And
I was like, fucking shut up. It's been half this 8 minutes I've been watching this just loud.
Honestly,
I cannot.
There's a woman screaming for probably, and I don't know if this is exact, but it felt like almost a minute straight.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, is she going to stop? Are they going to cut away from this?
Yeah.
Like, what is going on? So what Brittany's getting at is we didn't finish the movie.
No, we didn't even get like 1% into the movie. But I want to go back to the documentary real quick because within the documentary, they talk about this movie from 1977. And it just...
For quite a bit.
They did.
They really focus on it for a fair amount of time.
They definitely did. And I don't know how I forgot this. It's like I blacked out or something because I was like, oh, we figured out a movie to watch. Like, let's just watch it. But I remembered this one part in the documentary that to me was just so, it was egregious, like the way that they portrayed this. And basically, so one of the victims, I believe it was Betty Jo Booker, she had played the saxophone. And in the film, they changed the instrument she played to a trombone. And they did so to give this particular scene in the movie more shock value. And what they did basically is once she's like captured by the Phantom Killer, he attaches a knife to the end of the trombone. And you know how like a trombone has like the arms that like you pull out and in. Like he pulls it out and stabs her, pulls it back in, pulls it out and stabs her again.
While like, acting like he's playing the trombone.
Exactly. And I was like, what the fuck? Like genuinely, when I watched that, I was horrified. And like, I just think about all of our other episodes that we do and all these cases that we cover and how horrified anybody who knew those victims, who loved those victims, would feel if, like, this situation was changed for, like, this movie shock value moment that, like, doesn't even fucking matter. Like, why would they... It made me so angry. I'm like, why would I have wanted to watch this movie in the first place? Right. Because this documentary told me the movie would suck. So here I am.
Well, I mean, generally I can watch anything, and I'm so desensitized to a lot of things. And this was like one time where I was like uncomfortable in like what they showed, and just that, you know, a documentary was showing, and it's not a fault on the documentary's part, because they're covering this, you know, Lover's Lane thing and the hook, and they go to this place where all these murders happened, and then they stumble upon the fact that it's an annual tradition that where these murders happened, play this movie.
Oh my God,
like
I forgot about this. Yep.
Like a drive-in theater type thing. They're exploiting a tragedy that occurred, making it into a movie, changing aspects of it to make it more gruesome, and then this town in Texarkana like revels in the fact that these murders happened and this movie was made, and they play it annually, and the whole thing just like rubbed me the wrong way, and I was like, this is really kind of fucked up.
It is.
And I usually don't say that on like stuff. I can watch whatever, I can read whatever, be a part of whatever.
We'll be watching stuff and I'm like cringing. You can like see my face like as I'm watching. I'm like, oh God, I hate that, or I'll cover my eyes or whatever. And John's just staring there, blank stare, like he's fine. But like that part, definitely you could tell.
Yeah, it just rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't like something where I like couldn't look at it or had to like look away type thing. There are things that get to me, and this is one of them, and it just rubbed me the wrong way. The whole fact that they watch this every year and put it on. It's like, what about the people that were affected by the tragedy that still live in Texarkana?
Mm-hmm.
They
Family
now have
members,
to watch this
great
movie,
nieces,
or
great nephews, great, you know, whatever. It's just, it was
I mean,
just
it's not even that long ago.
up.
It could be fucking brothers and sisters of the people that were killed.
I mean, 1946.
Yeah. If they're 19 at the time.
I mean, I get they're probably really
80?
old now.
Yeah.
So, but
Still around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, kind of moving on a little bit, but also like in the same vein, I wanted to touch on the fact that like the Phantom Killer has now become like this trope in TV shows and movies, and like I guess keep right along that same vein, but like specifically there were two that came to mind like while we were watching. I had never heard of The Town That Dreaded Sundown when they brought that up, but my head had gone to two different shows. One, Riverdale.
The Hood.
The Black Hood.
The Black Hood.
Yes, and like his MO in the show, and you know, he goes to these Lover Lane.
Goes after sinners.
Yes, he's going after sinners in the town of Riverdale. Sorry, spoilers, guys, here. But he's going to a Lover's Lane area. He's using a gun. Like, it's all the same thing. And then one that's a little bit different, but more so like, I guess you would call it like the costume of the Phantom Killer, is Fear Street 1978, which...
Yes. Phenomenal.
I will not spoil that for you, because if you've never seen any of the Fear Streets, you need to make that like your lead up to Halloween movie watching experience.
At least the second one.
The second one is the best one. I'm obsessed with the second one. It goes second, first, third for me. That's like the order that I like the best. Mm-hmm. I kind of want to watch that now. They were so good. But yeah, so it's like you see this all the time in movies, you see it in film. So not only is it like this urban legend that people talk about in the world just in general to like scare their kids or something, you see it now like
it's
in
made its
all
way
of
into
this,
all this entertainment
all this
stuff.
media, all this entertainment. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And then there was one other thing that I wanted to touch on too, and that had to do with the naming of serial killers. Your girl has watched the entire series of Criminal Minds probably 7 times, and there's like 350 episodes there. So this is my life.
So you're saying you waste a lot of time.
Yes. No. No, it's not in the background. I don't sit there and like intently watch it. I could probably tell you what happens in every episode though. But that is a BAU number 1 no-no. You do not name the serial killer.
Right, because you're giving like importance to them essentially.
Yeah,
right?
it's what they want. They want the infamy. They want this name attached to them. They want to go down with their name known.
They're looking for notoriety.
Exactly. And I kind of got this question answered though, because they interviewed this, I guess you could call him like an expert. And I think it was the expert that said this too, that it's like this ancient human nature thing that gives us as humans this sense of control over something that we have no control over. So like you can't control what the Phantom Killer does, but you can control what you call him.
Yeah.
But still, I think it's wicked fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be better off to call him the pee-pee doo-doo head murderer. Because who would want to who would want to go down in history as the pee-pee doo-doo head murderer?
Next, honestly, just like give that to the media and be like, call your next serial killer this.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that would be...
You know, you don't want to give them something that like attaches to what they do or their MO or something like that has a good ring to it. You want it to sound absolutely fucking ridiculous.
Yes.
Then they're like, well, I better stop what I'm doing because I don't want
I
another
don't want
news
to be
outlet
known
to
as
call
the
me.
PB Doo Doo head murderer.
Yeah, you know.
That's all I have on The Hook. John, do you have anything else you want to add on that one?
Not necessarily, just something else that kind of comes to mind while we're talking media and documentaries and movies and stuff is I Know What You Did Last Summer. You know, the guy attacks with a hook.
Yeah.
I'm sure that probably has something to do with it there.
It's everywhere. It is literally everywhere.
Yes.
And we're going to dive into this in a couple more of the legends, like towards the end. But I have another example of like how I've seen it in my everyday life. Literally, we watched this documentary like a week ago, and I have seen so many instances of like almost all of these legends.
Yep.
Every which way I look in entertainment.
So even with the next legend that I'll go over, which is the Candyman.
Which is, guys, how cool John's going to be telling us a story.
I'm not telling you a story. I'm just talking a little bit more than usual.
I'm excited about it because I can shut my mouth.
So the Candyman also has somebody that attacks with a hook. But I'll get into it a little bit here. Okay, so to get into mine, I covered the Candyman. We're going to go back and forth. So Brittany did one, I'll do one, she'll do one, I'll do the last one. So the Candyman, I mean, kind of already probably gets your mind thinking, okay, Candyman, candy. Well, that's not really how the documentary started out with it. So the documentary shows a clip or two from the 1992 slasher flick, Candyman, which doesn't seem to really have much to do with the urban legend they dove into. That movie seems to align more with Bloody Mary than the type of Candyman I thought of.
Bloody Mary as in like Bloody Mary in the mirror 3 times?
Yes. So I'm not going to dive into the whole Candyman movie portion that they did.
Okay.
But I mean, I've never even seen the movie. But from what I gathered, he appears after you call his name 5 times while looking into a mirror.
Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Ay.
I don't know. Oh,
It's
Bob's
from
Burger.
Bob's.
Yeah. So, I mean, I looked at the brief like rundown of it, and that was like the biggest thing. But I think he was like a slave from like the 1800s or something. It was weird. It did not have anything to do, from what I gathered just by a quick search or look at, having anything to do with candy.
Okay, interesting. So it's just called that for funsies.
I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe they did a remake, I'm pretty sure, that came out in 2021 that I think stars the guy that played in Tenet. But I could be wrong on that too.
John has so many useless facts.
Yes.
So many.
Like that ADHD thing I sent you earlier today.
Yes, exactly.
So the Candyman they talk about in the documentary is built around people poisoning or putting needles and razor blades in kids' candy on Halloween. That's what I thought of.
That's what I thought of as well.
So the two hosts or creators or whatever, they headed down to Houston, Texas, where they focused on the story of Ronald Clark O'Brien, a real piece of shit.
Yes, a real piece of garbage.
But before we go more into that, do you remember any stories from when you were a kid about people messing with candy or anything like that around Halloween?
Oh my God, all the time. It was like, check the seams in your, Snickers bars and like all these things to make sure that it hasn't been tampered with.
Right.
And it was always like double check everything. If something was opened, you tossed it. If it was like those weird people that would give apples, like throw those away because you don't know when anyone like injected into that or whatever.
What about Fig Newtons? I used to get Fig Newtons every now and then.
Really?
Yeah, it was weird. It was probably
I wouldn't have given a fuck if I had like an open king size bar when I was a kid. I'd be like, give me that.
Full size
Give
bars.
me that bar.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I remember that vividly.
I remember being worried about it, or my parents being worried about it.
Yep.
But I never remember any stories about it actually happening.
No, me either. It was always like you're supposed to check your candy.
Right. It was this fear that was hanging around and that was like looming over Halloween before you ate your candy and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really heard a story about somebody actually having a problem with it.
Yeah, no, me either.
So maybe that's that whole urban
this
legend
is just
thing.
Rhode Island.
Right, but we were real children with real experiences. So, let's see. So apparently, as far as I can tell, there's been no proven widespread instances of strangers poisoning or tampering with candy causing harm or death to children and or adults.
Literally ever, right? There was
like ever. Like if
except
it did,
for that
it
one
was,
lady. Wasn't there one lady that they mentioned in the documentary?
Right, but I don't think it caused harm or death. I think that she gave this stuff out, but like if you got an ant pill in your bag, would you eat it thinking it's a freaking
I was like, what's an ant pill? And it's like literally just those little traps that you put on the ground.
Yeah.
It's like, sure, let me take a bite of this. Like,
right.
what?
So the little background on that in the documentary, they talked about this one lady that gave out like random stuff to people. But again, I don't think there are widespread issues of this happening. Nothing that caused death or serious harm to anybody.
Yeah.
So again, the urban legend portion of it. And yes, if you notice, I said strangers giving tainted candy or things out to people. Because now it's time to talk about Ronald Clark O'Brien for a bit. And I really don't have the words to properly describe how I feel about this guy, but I'll tell you what happens. So the short version is that on October 31st, 1974, O'Brien went out trick-or-treating with his 2 kids, Timothy and Elizabeth, and one of their neighbors who also brought their 2 children as well. Reports state that as the group approached one of the homes, nobody came to the door. From there, everyone but O'Brien moved on to the next house. A short time later, O'Brien caught back up with the group and was holding 5 of those big, long, plastic-tubed pixie sticks. You know the ones I'm talking about?
Yeah. Was this in the documentary? I didn't catch that
No.
portion.
I just wanted to give more of this.
All right, yeah.
So yes, side note, they didn't dive super far into what happened with O'Brien. They glossed over, but I just want to give a little bit more fact-based
Yeah,
stuff
I think that's more interesting to know. I wish they had added that.
Right, okay. So, like I said, a short time later, he caught back up with the group and was holding 5 of those big, long plastic tube pixie sticks. He gave 1 to each kid, and then the other went to another child that he knew from church or something like that, I think they said, that they ended up crossing paths with later on throughout the night.
Yeah.
So later on that night, after the trick-or-treating had concluded, Timothy, O'Brien's son, asked for some candy. Now, some say that he chose the pixie stick, while others, I think his wife, claimed that O'Brien forced him to take the tainted, sugary treat from him. It's been mentioned that the powder inside had stuck together, and O'Brien had to roll it between his fingers so his son could eat it, and then poured it into his mouth.
Yeah, I remember this from the documentary.
Right? So once the young boy ingested some of the candy, he immediately felt sick and ran to the bathroom, where O'Brien alleged that he held his dying son in his arms as he vomited and convulsed.
Jeez, ugh.
Word seemed to spread quickly, and the other 4 pixie sticks, which thankfully hadn't been eaten, were recovered and I assume probably seized by police or destroyed by the parents or something. So seems like Timothy was the only one that was affected by this.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
So it was candy that had something in it.
Yes. Okay. So all we know at that point was, this seemed to be a tainted candy.
Yeah.
So initially, police didn't suspect O'Brien of any wrongdoing. He came up with some bullshit story, leading police back to that house where nobody answered. O'Brien said that whoever lived there was the one who gave out the poison candy. Not long after that claim was made, though, the homeowner, who had been working until 11 p.m. that Halloween night, was ruled out of having any connection to the poison candy.
Mm-hmm.
So as police continued their investigation, their opinion on O'Brien changed, and he became their prime suspect. Investigators went on to learn that O'Brien couldn't hold a job, and he was drowning in debt.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, sure, that may not be incriminating, but get this. Throughout 1973, up until Halloween night, 1974, O'Brien had made multiple comments and spoken with numerous individuals regarding potassium cyanide.
Fucked.
I know that comes up in conversation all the time.
Right, yeah.
So he'd inquired how much it would take to kill someone and where to purchase it. And to top it all off, this dirtbag had, in the time leading up to his son's death, taken out several life insurance policies on both of his children.
Yeah, that was the part that, got me in my stomach. Right. I was like, he was going to do it to both of his kids.
Yes, and presumably let those other kids die.
Yeah, because they were 5.
Right.
That's insane.
So if all those kids had taken that candy and eaten it, he would have gathered the life insurance money on his kids, with the other kids dying as oh, no, it wasn't just my kids. It was all them too, and whatever. So very
lucky that those kids did not have that candy. Right. That is crazy.
So I saw in a couple articles that I think it was, I don't know, it was one of the other kids. So it was one of the 3 other kids, not his daughter.
Yep.
Had attempted to eat the pixie stick, but so assume that when he put the cyanide in, it was just at the very top. He probably poured some out, put the cyanide in, and then folded it over and restapled it.
Yep.
And the kid was asleep in their bed with the pixie stick, but they were unable to get the staple out to eat the freaking candy.
Shut up.
I don't know if that's 100% accurate, but I saw it in a couple articles and I was like, wow.
That is wild. Oh my God.
Freaking crazy. Right?
That is crazy.
So when we were watching this, I even said to you before it was said in the documentary that this dipshit was clearly trying to use the urban legend of poisoned candy as some type of smokescreen to try and hide his involvement in the killing of his children.
Yep.
And then later on, one of the experts or one of the people that was interviewed about it from a university or whatever said that that's what he did. He was trying to, use this urban legend as a way to say, oh, no, somebody gave out poison candy and try to remove any involvement from himself and put it on them.
Clearly he was just stupid, though, because it was like such a bad, like, first of all, it's a horrible thing.
Right.
But like, he was so stupid about it. Like, what, you're going to go talk to all your friends about poison?
Right. Like, why not look that up in silence? You don't want to try and contact people about it.
Yeah, it's not like you're going to have internet records back in 1974.
Right. I think at one point, and this, again, I only saw in a couple articles, but he attempted to purchase cyanide, but wherever he went to buy it, it was like 5 pounds was the minimum amount to buy.
He's like, so I just need a tiny sprinkle.
Right. So I think he ended up getting it from like a chemist or something like that.
But like, wouldn't the person that gave that to him be like, buddy, why do you need this? You're some random Joe Schmo, like working a normal old job, like not needing random chemicals like this.
I don't know why they ended up giving it to him. I don't know the background. I think it was from a chemist because it was like a small amount just to use for the pixie sticks and stuff.
That's just crazy.
But yeah, so clearly, obviously, this guy is a total piece of shit. And you can already assume that, okay, he must be involved in this. Yes, you'd be correct in thinking that. Now, in the documentary, they show a couple clips of O'Brien talking about what happened. And one in particular is an interview conducted by Phil Donahue for the show Donahue. I think it went through a couple different instances of name changes and stuff. I think this guy interviewed like celebrities and everything, but then they wanted to change it up. So they were like, oh, I'm going to go interview this guy that's on death row or something to that effect.
So yeah, this guy ends up getting convicted for the murder of his son. And he gets sentenced to death.
Yeah, so after the police were on him, they uncover all this information. They charge him. He's put in front of a jury, and they convict him in like 45 minutes.
Yeah, it was wicked quick.
Right. So then after that, then they go back and they have to figure out his sentence, and it's like, oh, death penalty. And I think that was like in another hour or something like that.
Yeah, no wonder.
Right. So this guy's sitting on death row. Phil Donahue comes in, going to interview him because this was still like a big thing in the news because it's like this guy poisoned his kids.
It was the 80s. What? No. Yeah.
I believe it was the 80s. Yes. I didn't mark that down.
I think it was the
70s.
It was the 70s, late 70s?
Well, the murder happened in 74.
Yeah, I just don't know how long he stayed on death row.
It was like, I think it was 11 years or something like that. It was
so probably early 80s then. Yeah.
It was in the 80s.
Okay.
So Phil Donahue goes and does this interview. And during the interview, Donahue levies a claim that O'Brien is accused of ruining Halloween for everyone. And this is what really pissed me off. O'Brien smirked, laughed, and said something like, well, that's a matter of opinion.
Ugh, God,
and I was like, you are a friggin' narcissist.
Yep.
You have no remorse for what you did to your kid. If you could have gotten away with it, you would have just blown the money and been in more debt, and it wouldn't have changed anything. So you are just totally in it for yourself, total piece of shit. Like, glad that, later on we'll get into it, but glad that you were put to death over this.
Oh, absolutely.
So in regards to this guy and knowing that he was interviewed on like mainstream television and stuff, it really made me wonder, like, if we contact our friends over at LA Not So Confidential and say, hey, you need to watch this and let us know, like, is this guy a psychopath? Is he a narcissist?
Is he a sociopath? What
like,
is he?
This guy had a lot of freaking issues, and I want to know their take on it, so maybe we can talk about that with them.
Yeah, and they do a ton of documentary reviews, too. I wonder if they would be willing to watch this one and cover it on their show. I would love to hear their opinion on these.
Yeah. So once O'Brien was charged and convicted of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder, he was placed on death row. That's when that interview took place. After several delays, O'Brien was finally put to death via lethal injection on March 31st, 1984.
Okay, so 10 years, too. Okay.
So just to kind of wrap this up, this guy pulled this crap killing his kid under the guise of this urban legend of the Candyman years before I was born, yet that legend that preceded him and what he did and even continued on through my childhood and probably even still now.
100%. That still happens today. I mean, that was happening, I remember it like 5 to 7 years ago. You know, that was just such a big thing. I'm sure parents listening now will probably be like shaking their head. Yes, like, yeah, we check our kids' candy. And
that just reminded me of something in the
I bet it's exactly what I was just going to bring up. I bet it was.
In the news clip after this whole thing happened with O'Brien, the parents were allowed to, I guess, bring their candy to this one hospital that they covered, and hospitals were x-raying candy.
Yeah, and but then like, in one of the scenes on like it looked like a conveyor belt, there was an apple sitting there, and I was like,
right.
Why? Why are you x-raying the apple?
Right.
And the girl's like, oh yeah, we've had lots of parents come in with their candy, but
we
haven't found anything. I'm like, it's just wild to think, though, that this is such a scary thing for people.
Oh, it's ingrained in everybody's mind.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think
it'll ever go away.
I don't think so either. Whereas the whole Lover's Lane thing may go away because it's not like, you know, the young teens making out and having sex and stuff isn't frowned upon today as much as it was back in the day.
Yeah.
You know, morals have changed and life has changed and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas kids are always going to go out for Halloween. Parents are always going to fear for their kids' safety.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always going to be that looming threat of somebody trying to do something bad to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is one of those urban legends that I think is like one that'll live on in infamy.
Yep.
Maybe people don't know O'Brien and the terrible things that he did, but they'll always be worried about, you know.
Because you pass it down and you remember it. Like, for us, when we have kids, we'll think about that and say, wow, our parents showed us this when we were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we do it with our kids, they're going to say, wow, our parents showed us this growing up. And then when they have their kids, it's the same thing. It's just going to continue and continue throughout generation after generation.
Yeah.
And you're right. This will probably go on until the end of time.
I agree. And I think that the reason being is because it's always out of fear for someone that you care for.
Absolutely. Babe, if you went out trick-or-treating and came home, I can't even say it with a straight face.
Let me check those peanut butter cups.
Yep, I'd be like, let me open up the seam. Let me just run my finger down. Doesn't open up. Excellent.
No needles. Fantastic. Whereas some of these urban legends, I don't think that they're, you know, as ingrained in society as this one in particular, but also a couple of the other ones.
Yeah, so the one that I'm going to dive into next is one that really, you know, I feel like is talked about a lot, but again, is just like the Candyman, that I don't think it's anything that happens often or really ever, but it's one of those things that as a person, you're probably always going to question it, and then they just love to throw this next one into media.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so it's my turn again. You get back to my voice more now.
Yay.
But the next urban legend is one that I had definitely heard about before, and I knew of the case that inspired it as well, or allegedly inspired it.
Because you're a know-it-all.
Maybe. No, but that legend is the babysitter and the man upstairs. So basically, the legend is, you guessed it, about a babysitter who continuously gets calls from some creepy dude that keeps telling her to check on the children. As the calls keep coming in and the babysitter gets more and more frightened, she decides to call the police. And when the police trace the call, they find that it's coming from
inside the house.
I mean, honestly, though, you see this legend adapted time and time again in modern day film and TV and all of it.
I don't think I've ever even seen the movie, but all that keeps popping in my head is When a Stranger Calls.
Yeah, that's the exact movie that I'm thinking of. Like, I remember watching that when I was younger. I don't remember when it came out, but I feel like maybe high school age for me.
That girl that was a lead character, I feel like that was the one movie she was ever in.
Yeah, like
and
she fell off
the planet.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Fell off the face of the earth. Like, you never saw her in anything again.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's always, they build up the suspense and she's getting these calls and she's more and more nervous. And it's like, why is this guy being so weird? Why does he keep telling me to check on the kids? The kids are fine. She, you know, finally
Have you
is like,
on them, though?
Exactly. But even so, I'm pretty sure, like in the movie anyway, she goes up and she's checking on the kids and they're fine. And it's like, what? Why is this guy saying this to me? And then finally, it's like she's on the call, like they're doing the trap and trace, and they're like, you need to get out because he's inside the house. And then it's like, that's the epitome of like,
the calls are coming from inside the house.
And then like they start with like the crazy loud music and everyone's running and it's like, oh my God. And like you're instantly like terrified. Right. Sure, it might make for a really good suspenseful movie. I mean,
not really
maybe
good.
not really good, but a really suspenseful movie.
Mm-hmm.
But is it something that happens?
I think that this one, I know there is a case that you're going to get into.
Yes.
But I think this one is just playing into like adolescent fear.
I agree. Yeah.
Because most of the time, people that are babysitting, it's usually like, you know, a young teen and you're in, you know, a strange location.
Yep.
Right.
You're not comfortable.
Yeah, you might be there, you know, every Friday and Saturday night or something like that, but it's not your house, and, you know, you're always worried that somebody's going to be lurking around.
Yeah, well, like my best friend the other day texted me about that.
Yeah.
And how she's like down watching these dogs, and if you're listening, hi. I feel like we do that to like all of our friends. Like if you're listening, we're talking about you on the podcast. But she's down and she's watching her friend's dogs, and she's like, oh, I just, like, I feel uncomfortable in somebody else's house. And, like,
Yes.
we're 30-year-old women. And, like, we still feel uncomfortable in that situation.
Yeah.
So I don't even think it necessarily has to be, like, an adolescent thing. I think it's just weird when you're in somebody else's house. If you're house sitting, if you're dog sitting, it's a foreign space. It's dark outside. It's probably not, like, I know in our house, like, what lights I can put on to feel more comfortable, what I can put on TV. I don't go in the basement, you know, those things. And it just feels like I can get comfortable in my own house, even like if you're not home, if it's dark out, whatever.
Yeah.
But someone else's, even if I put on like my comfort show of Bob's Burgers, I'm still going to be wicked freaked out because like I don't know what could come from where. And it's just weird. So, but like John just said, I'm going to get into a real life case. And I had actually heard about this one before. A couple of podcasts that I've listened to over the years did cover it. And that is the murder of Jeanette Christman from Columbia, Missouri. So on the night of March 18th, 1950, Jeanette Christman was babysitting for the Romack family's 3-year-old son. Hours later, when the Romacks returned to their home, they found Jeanette dead on the floor, having been beaten, raped, and strangled with an electrical cord that I believe was cut from an iron. Over time, more and more information came out about this crime itself, and one of the biggest things that stood out, at least to me, which made it appear to be the reason maybe why these creators kind of latched on to this crime, being one that made them believe that it kind of inspired the babysitter and the man upstairs legend, was the fact that one of the windows in the house was broken. But it looked to have been broken from the inside, which was just, you know, it just gives you that creepy vibe. Like, that's scary. Like, just to know, it goes back to that, like, suspenseful movie saying the calls are coming from inside your house. Obviously, way different than the, you know, legend premise of it, but...
Yeah, but, I mean, you would think that, you know, if a window was broken, it would have been broken from the outside for somebody to get in.
Exactly. So why and how...
So why have it broken on the inside?
Yes.
It was weird. And from what I remember, the shades were down still, and there was nothing disturbed underneath the window.
Yeah.
So it was like more of a distraction.
Yes. So basically, this story is unsolved. And I'm going to dive into like how, I guess, this whole babysitter and the man upstairs, like broken window from the inside, like kind of all ties together. But I want to touch on the suspect in this case, or like person of interest or whatever he is, before we kind of like tie it together. So there's been one individual who's been brought up in nearly every podcast or documentary or really any sort of media that covers Jeanette Christman's case. And obviously this documentary was no different because they brought up the name Robert Mueller. So he was a wicked sketch from the start. And just one comment from him alone like gave me this big old pit in my stomach. And I guess he'd been friends with Ed Romack, who was the father of the little boy Jeanette was watching the night she was killed. And he had previously commented on Jeanette's virginity and like how that was like appealing to him and just so creepy. And he would always say weird shit like that. But a lot of the details of this crime made it seem like he could have had involvement. And honestly, for like the next hour, I could probably tell you about every reason why I think he could have been involved. But regardless of my feelings on the matter, at one point, Mueller was given a polygraph, which he passed, and then a grand jury just wouldn't indict him. So he was completely left alone, not looked into as a person of interest or suspect in the murder of Jeanette Christman. But the thing that I want to go back to like touch on the whole broken window and all of that, and tying into the urban legend, is the fact that this guy knew the Romacks. He knew Jeanette. He knew all these specifics about the house. He knew specifics about things that
were in the house.
Yes. So specifically was the shotgun. Do you remember them talking about that?
That's what I was
he
referring
taught
to.
her how to, or not Robert, it was Ed Romack.
Yep.
Taught her how to use the shotgun. And so I believe the whole thing was that he broke the window from the inside to distract her from getting the shotgun. So it wasn't necessarily the fact that he was inside the house waiting for her, but he used it in, you know, this way, like when he was already inside. You know what I mean?
To get her to go away from the shotgun because the shotgun was kept near the side or back door or something like that.
Yeah, some, like maybe a linen closet or something, yeah.
To get her away from the shotgun, so he knew that, you know, once he could subdue her, that she didn't have that available to her.
Yes, exactly. So in the documentary, they also kind of tie in this other murder that took place in 1946, and that was the murder of Mary Lou Jenkins. And she was killed just 2 blocks from where Jeanette would be later killed in 1950. And these crimes had like crazy eerie similarities, but one in particular was the fact that the murder weapon was almost identical. The weapon used in Mary Lou Jenkins' murder was an electrical cord cut from an appliance. So same thing, like whether it was an iron or not, like that is a very distinct MO if you ask me. So they actually end up arresting some other random guy.
Yeah.
And they like bring all this up, and I feel like a lot of this particular legend like really focused on these crimes more than the legend itself. Like this was like very true crime. I feel like when we were watching this, like there wasn't a ton to talk about the babysitter and the man upstairs other than the fact that like they were babysitting when these things happened.
Right. It was like, hey, this is the legend. And then look at these 2 crimes that happened. Both happened while the girls were babysitting. Super similar, super close by, super similar MOs.
Yeah.
And then kind of got into the guy, and then they got into the suspect, Robert Mueller. And did people from the area think that it was him? And then I remember somebody making a comment.
Well, wait, because we're going to dive into the other wild part, which is supposedly some guy by the name of Floyd Cochran, who was a black man. And I think he had like a learning disability or something. I can't quite remember. But he had like supposedly made mention at one point or another, like some sort of incriminating comment about Mary Lou Jenkins' murder. So they ended up just like taking him in, arrested him, whatever, done. Put the guy, I think they put him to death, or he was in prison for life, one or the other. And his involvement in this was like highly disputed.
Yeah, this was like a racist type charging and conviction.
Exactly. So then they tied that in, how there were multiple black men who were being convicted of crimes that they very clearly did not commit. But then they tied it into the fact that this area in Missouri back in the 1940s and 50s
like a whole
was incredibly
wax.
racist. Exactly.
Right.
So, but then it just goes back to, because they interviewed this expert again for this particular urban legend, and they had a profiler come in and like assess all the similarities, and he's like, I'm really freaking confident that it's the same person that killed both Jeanette Chrisman and Mary Lou Jenkins.
And it's probably Robert Mueller.
Exactly. And you're like, why was this guy never indicted, never brought to trial? All of the things that he did were so obvious that he was a fucking weirdo and a super creep and clearly had this weird thing for young girls.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have like the racism portion back then, as much as it's still a thing today, it was like super prevalent back then.
Horrible.
It's like
segregation.
Yeah, I mean, segregation, but also if they could pin something on this black guy that clearly didn't have anything to do with it, while they had this other kid that had strong connections to it but was white.
Yep.
It's like they
That's
didn't
just
even
what
care
they
about it.
did.
It's just what they did.
Yeah. Which is horrible. And overall, I think what the creators were trying to get across to the watcher and or the listener of this documentary was the fact that real life is actually what's scarier than the urban legend. Because you look at this babysitter and the man upstairs thing, and it's like, was there really a crime that actually created this? Or was this like a trope that was brought up in film? And, you know, it's just a scary thing to think. Because I think this particular section of the documentary as well starts out with, you're at no higher risk of being harmed in this way when you're babysitting than when you're not.
Yeah, I think that I've said it before, probably on this podcast, that life is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
And that most fiction is brought to pages or film because of crazy things that have happened in real life. And it's the same thing with these urban legends. It's like, yes, these urban legends are these things that you're always scared about, but then when you learn the true facts of things that have happened that are somewhat similar to those legends, it's like even more, you know, it brings even more gravitas to it. It's like, wow, this is freaking crazy. Like with these women that were killed, with O'Brien that killed his kid with cyanide poison. Like, it's way worse than, you know, the idea of it when something is actually true and happened.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's really what they tried to get to with this particular legend, because in my opinion, I don't really think that this was as neat and tidy of a way to take a true story and tie it to the legend as the first two were.
Okay.
I think this one was the first one where for me, I was like, well, I don't know if that's really where this would have stemmed from. And I think it was almost like grasping at straws a little bit to say we couldn't find anything to tie this urban legend.
Yes.
And
I think
this is the most similar we could find.
Yes. I think that if you're thinking that as far as your portion of the urban legends go, then as we get into mine, it seems as though the documentary started off pretty strong. And then kind of once it hit this third urban legend, kind of started spiraling out and they kind of ran out of,
like true stories
steam.
to
they ran out of steam.
Yeah, I agree. I would say the first half was definitely far more intriguing than the second half.
Yes, in the sense of tying a real crime to an urban legend.
Yeah, because don't get me wrong, like
I'm
a true crime buff. Like I'll listen to anything true crime. So.
Right, but the urban legend itself, like all of these urban legends, outside of I think the last one that I'm going to cover, those are all pretty predominant, and most people at least our age, maybe a little younger, will know them and understand them.
Yeah.
You have the Lover's Lane, you have the Candyman. Even if you don't think of them as an urban legend, these are still fears that you've had as a child or growing up or something you've heard about or seen in some type of media.
Yeah.
Now, when we get into the last one, if you're ready to move on.
Yes, I am.
We get into killer clowns.
Yeah, I don't like clowns.
And I think...
can't even look at them. They creep me out so bad.
Yeah, I think that what you just said kind of encapsulates killer clowns more so than the urban legend of clowns and evil clowns and stuff. It's like people just don't like clowns because they're creepy.
Yes.
It's not necessarily because something happened with clowns or somebody associated with clowns did something terrible to create this. I think it's just like a fear of spiders, a fear of clowns, a fear of heights.
Yeah.
It's a phobia.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this was, in my opinion, the weakest portion.
Well, I think that's what happened. It started out super strong with the Moonlight murders and the fact that, like, you could say, like, this is probably what created this legend. And then... Or
at least strengthened the legend.
Yeah, to say, like, this happened in real life.
Like, this legend was around, and then this thing happened, and it's like, hey.
Exactly. So that one, like, it was a really good, like, right out the gate, perfect one for them to start with. Candyman, still strong, not as strong, I don't think. And then once we got to the babysitter and the man upstairs, it started to go down a little bit, and now by the end, it was like, yeah, I don't know if I agree.
Right. So the last urban legend they got into was what seems to be everyone's least favorite. At least everyone is you and I.
Yes.
Killer clowns. Now, I remember Bozo the Clown from when I was really little, but I don't ever remember being afraid of him. It wasn't until I saw the movie It as a child that I even realized that there was this whole coulrophobia thing.
That's what it's called?
Said it right? Yeah. Coulrophobia.
Ugh. How about just clownophobia? I like that
pretty
one
much.
better.
I mean, they both start with a C. Let's just make it easy.
We're just going to call it clownophobia.
Right. So once I was introduced to Pennywise in It, I know that you're terrified of the movie and you won't even watch it.
No. I think my hatred of clowns happened as an adult. Because when I was a kid, it was always just like this flippant thing. But now as an adult, I'm like, those things are scary looking.
Okay, so yeah, I'll tell you how it kind of went for me. And it's probably the same vein as you.
Okay.
So... not until I met Pennywise in the movie It, and I saw that as a child, I didn't even realize that like people were afraid of clowns for whatever reason. And then once I was introduced to them, then I started associating all clowns with being creepy. It's like one of those things where once your innocence is tainted, there's no going back. Once you saw one killer clown, it's not hard to see that in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, most people who are into true crime or urban legends generally associate the trope of killer clowns with the serial killer John Wayne Gacy. The documentary does spend some time talking about him and the terrible things that he did, but that's not something that I'm really interested in diving into. It's something that has a lot of information around.
Oh, yeah.
It's been done a million times, and we don't have the time or energy or desire to really dive into him.
No, we all know how I feel about serial killers. I'll watch Criminal Minds all day and Profile and all of that. I say profile like I do it, but, I'll watch people profile, all of that. But when it comes to, like, real life serial killers, I just, I feel like people just have this.
I think we're okay with associating a serial killer with a crime that's unsolved and trying to make a connection there.
Yeah.
But not highlighting what it is that they do.
I don't want to give them
like
that infamy, but...
Not to say that it's, not something that people find interesting, but it's not necessarily what we do here on this podcast.
Yeah, I think we definitely have a different viewpoint on that.
Yeah. So as far as the whole Gacy thing goes, though, and his connection to this urban legend, he did perform as a clown, but it said that he had never murdered his victims while wearing his clown garb.
Yeah, I remember that. Nevertheless,
his name and his misdeeds have become synonymous with the subject. If you do want to deep dive, though, into Gacy and all that stuff,
yeah,
check out Defense Diaries. Bob Motta's got all the information you could ever ask for.
Yeah, I had started listening to it because, again, it's like, I don't want to dive into it. I'll sit there and I'll listen to it.
Yeah.
But I don't want to do the research on someone like that. I think that's my problem. I think it's a me thing. I think I'm the problem. Where it's like, I don't want to dive deep. I don't want to try and analyze all of that. I want somebody else to analyze
and
that.
And you're okay with taking the information in.
Yeah. Whereas I don't want to talk about it. I think
spend your time writing about it.
Yes, I think I've officially discovered my problem with serial killers because we only ever did one episode, which
true.
was the New Bedford Highway in the very beginning. And that one I struggled so much with. You remember?
Right. Yeah.
So I think...
And that was also before newspapers.com subscription.
Oh my God, yeah, it was. I'm so sorry for our first 25 episodes, but...
It is what it is.
But yes, Defense Diaries, highly recommend. Bob Motta's awesome.
Very nice guy. We met him not too long ago.
Yep.
So aside from Gacy, the documentary covers the idea of evil clowns who were said to have been seen abducting children, luring them into unmarked vans.
Yeah.
This is not something that I ever heard of as a kid, not something I was ever worried about as a kid. And then the only thing that I could really associate it with after hearing it was the black phone.
Okay, that's exactly what I was just going to bring up because it's like he wasn't fully dressed up as a clown, but it gave you those vibes.
Right. So The Black Phone was a movie that we watched earlier this year. I'm pretty sure it's a short story written by Stephen King's son.
I don't know that particularly, but I believe it was within a book, like a book of short stories.
Okay, that coworker of mine had mentioned Stephen King's son. And I think
coworker of yours. Gosh, you just know everything.
Hey, Victoria.
Hey.
So that movie is essentially about a masked man that abducts young children using a black van.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that the movie correlates with the idea of clowns per se, but the villain was masked, and there were balloons used in some of the scenes, if my memory serves me right.
Yes.
I think it was black balloons.
Yep. That's how he captured his victims, is he
dropped something and then let the balloons up in the air or something.
He let the balloons out of the van, which hit the kid in the face and disoriented him, and that was how he was able to subdue them.
Yeah, so outside of that, I don't really see a connection there.
No, me either.
So,
but again, that's another thing that just goes into media. Same thing with it. Same thing with all of this. You're seeing it in books. Oh my God, I forgot to bring up my thing.
Bring up your thing.
Ah,
bring it up now.
The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs. I'm reading a book right now because I am books to Brit and I love books now. And I am reading this book. It's called The Sundown Motel. It's like a spoopy / true crimey / thriller / mystery style book. It's a bunch of different genres. But
add some more slashes.
Yeah, I can add as many as you want. But in the book, they were talking about a murder that had happened, and one of the lines was, let me pull it up for you because I took a picture of it to send to John earlier. It says, maybe it was Michael Myers, or that story about the babysitter. The killer is inside the house. And I was like, it's in my freaking books. It's in everything.
You even texted me about it.
Yes, any type of media. I'm seeing it in shows. I'm seeing it in movies. I'm seeing it in books. I'm hearing it on podcasts. It's on the radio. It's everywhere.
So even though it wasn't the best part of the documentary as far as linking a true crime to the urban legend and kind of melding them together.
Yes.
The urban legend of, the man in the house, the babysitter, all that stuff is still seen throughout all of media.
Yeah, exactly.
So outside of the black phone and any connections that I had to the idea of, evil clowns abducting people, they did interview a few people on the street about...
Oh, yes, I remember this.
about this random thing, and people just seemed to want to be in a documentary and be recorded. It didn't seem like they had any valid information. It seemed like once the questions were being asked, people were just coming up with answers on the spot. It may not have been being totally truthful, But that's just me, looking into it.
This was one of the times in the documentary when I looked over at John and I could just like see the look on his face. Like he's got an eyebrow raised and he's like,
that's a little bullshit.
I don't know how much I believe that,
Yeah. So outside of that, lastly, they touched on the Aurora, Colorado mass shooting, which took place during a showing of The Dark Knight.
I was surprised by this portion. I didn't realize this.
Well, maybe you're a little bit more surprised. I knew a little bit more about it than you, I guess.
Yeah.
I think that this connection to killer clowns had to do with a supposed rumor where someone, assumedly connected to the investigation, stated that the shooter, James Holmes, had dyed his hair and referred to himself as the Joker. I don't know if this was ever substantiated or not, though. I understand why they tried to link this, heinous act to the urban legend of killer clowns, but for me, it didn't really work. I know that there was like talk of, oh, this guy dyed his hair and he was trying to be the Joker and this, that, and the other thing. And then the Dark Knight, the Joker is the villain, all that. And he was trying to be the Joker. But I don't know. I think that, again, that was never substantiated. I think that may have just been like, somebody investigating and being like, making that connection themselves.
Yeah.
Saying, oh, he dyed his hair. He's doing it at the Dark Knight. He's coming in to kill people. He's trying to be the Joker.
Yeah. I mean, I see what they were getting at. But again, I thought, a lot of their comparisons, I guess, with real life stories, wasn't this supposed to be what inspired the legend, not what came from the legend?
I mean, I guess I understand what they were trying to go about, because you can't necessarily find a crime that people are going to understand or know about, or maybe that you can even find that inspired a legend, because a lot of times legends may just come from stories that people tell and that, stand the test of time and go through generations, and parents tell their children and the children tell their children and go on like that.
But I think out of the 4, the other 3 were still, there was still something that happened prior to when said legend became prevalent. Whereas in this one, a lot of it was like after the fact. Like, oh, it came out. Oh, John Wayne Gacy happened. Oh, James Holmes, like all of this. It was after people were creeped out by clowns.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the whole John Wayne Gacy thing, that kind of came out before the boom of media and social media and the internet and the availability of information. So it's easy to take, crimes that occurred in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and say, oh, these may have inspired this urban legend, or these may have been attached to this urban legend, because information wasn't readily available back then as it is now. Whereas when you're talking about the killer clowns, yes, John Wayne Gacy, I think, took place before the whole media boom, stuff like that. But then you're talking about the Holmes thing, which happened in the 2000s and all that. I think that outside of, connecting more recent crimes to this urban legend, to me, and I would assume if it's to me, it's probably to the vast majority of our listeners, this is not an urban legend. This is a fear.
Yeah, this is a phobia, like you said before.
Right. So this is like where the documentary kind of took a nosedive for me. And I was like, oh, I understand these stories. Yes, I've heard of John Wayne Gacy. Yes, I know plenty about the Aurora, Colorado shooting, stuff like that. But it's like, this isn't an urban legend where, I'm going to tell my kids about, because my parents, like going back to the Candyman, they were checking it to make sure it wasn't tainted, that there weren't needles and razor blades and all this nonsense in it. But they readily put Bozo the Clown on TV for me.
Yeah. Yep.
It's not something that they were worried about, so it wasn't something that was instilled into me to be worried about. And it's not something that I'm going to pass on to somebody. It's just one of those inherent fears where, if you might be afraid of heights, you're afraid of heights. And if you're afraid of clowns, you're afraid of clowns.
I wish they had kind of ixnayed the Killer Clowns one and done Cropsey, because that's what they started the whole documentary with. And Cropsey was what inspired them to even do this documentary. And I think if they had like ended it with what inspired them, I think that would have been a great way cooler wrap up, to be like, this is the urban legend that set us on this path. Here's what it is. Even if they couldn't even tie anything real life to it, to just say like,
I don't know. That whole Cropsey thing had me feeling weird about watching this thing.
Yeah, and if they ended that way, though,
that would have been terrible. I would have been like, don't everybody watch this.
I have a bellyache and I need to go to bed.
So let's, from our memories, because we didn't really dive into this at the beginning, but at the beginning, So the one of the creators, at least, grew up in this area where Cropsey was this...
I think it was New York or Long Island, something like that.
Yeah, where Cropsey was this whole thing. I'm sure you probably remember better than I do, so if you want to explain a little more. All I remember is the insane asylum.
Yeah, so I believe... Okay, so it was Staten Island in New York City. And I don't even know where the name Cropsey came from, but basically he was like this crazy guy that escaped from this insane asylum. And according to this website that I'm on right now called The Lineup, it states, quote, an escaped mental patient with a hook for a hand who hunted children and dragged them back to the tunnel system that lay under the abandoned ruins of the old Seaview Hospital, end quote.
So I wonder if that's why they begin with the hook.
Yeah, so I wonder if like they got into Cropsey. Cropsey is what intrigued them, and then they, realized this whole hook for a hand thing. Did Cropsey's urban legend kind of morph into something else, which then they took and they ran with the hook? But again, I still think, for me, I would have really liked to learn more. I know there are documentaries about Cropsey that I could watch, but for this particular documentary... Because
it began with it.
Yeah, I was intrigued by it. It was definitely scary. It gave me a pit in my stomach just to see like the scenes that they put in.
The very disturbing scenes of essentially disabled people that were shoved into insane asylums and pretty much just left there to rot.
Like completely mistreated.
Yeah,
and it was
disturbing.
Horrible. And you're like, oh my God, what is this that I'm seeing right now? Like, this is terrible what's going on with these people.
I don't want to keep watching this.
Well, for me, like, I was actually surprisingly intrigued, and I was like, what is Cropsey? What is this urban legend?
And then it just gets cut off and goes to the
And then
hook.
we move into the new one, and I was like, oh, I really wish I had learned more about that. So I think that could have definitely like upped, as much as it was disturbing, and the whole story, just even that quote that I just read to you now, like it sounds terrifying. I still think that it would have been something that would have resonated a bit more than the Killer Clowns one did.
Yes, I agree. And I think to end off with the Killer Clowns, the other things that came to mind while watching this portion as I'm trying to make some type of connection was ICP, which you probably don't remember, Insane Clown Posse.
No.
So they were a rap group that like wore face paint looking like clowns that were prevalent mostly in the 90s.
So were they trying to not be popular because people didn't like clowns and no one would go to their shows?
You think of like, I mean, at least when I was growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s, like goths, and they were into all that stuff. And
yeah.
So I think that it was a small niche, but, whatever.
Also, just a poll for our listeners. I really want to know. Do you say niche, or niche? What is it? I feel like I say it different every time I say it.
I think that my preferred pronunciation is niche.
I think so too. That's how I like to say it best. But then like sometimes if I'm like in a conversation with someone else, I'll like try and sound like I'm educated. I'm like, oh, the niche. Yes. And it's like, maybe that was completely wrong. I don't know.
You sound so uneducated.
I know. But anybody listening, leave us a comment on social media. Email us. I really want to know. What do you say?
And if it's niche, spell it Neesh.
I was just going to say.
And then outside of ICP, Insane Clown Posse.
Yeah.
The other thing was, and I remember this being reported on not too long ago. Do you remember maybe like 5 to 10 years ago when the, quote, killer clowns were all over the news?
Killer clowns on the news for what?
Okay, clearly you don't remember. They weren't your typical face paint wearing clowns. It was people wearing those scary clown masks just hanging around.
Just for fun?
You don't remember this?
No. Where?
All right, so I'm pretty sure it was like 2016-ish. They were seen all over the place. They were just like acting menacingly and freaking people out.
What?
I never had a run-in with them personally, but I remember it being reported on, and it was like the pandemic of the time where all these crazy people are wearing these scary clown masks and hanging around like children's playgrounds and schools and like...
And just standing there.
Just being a nuisance.
But also a horrifyingly terrifying, scary nuisance.
Yes, like for people that
and not around Halloween.
The coulrophobia, was it?
Clownophobia.
Clownophobia.
And that's the one.
Would be terrified. But yes, I remember
I bet that's in the DSM-5.
This is being like all over the news, at least in like New England area.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, I was under a rock in 2016.
Yeah, but I mean, that kind of wraps it up for me as far as like the whole killer clown thing goes.
Yeah.
But in the end, I think that this may have been the weakest part of the documentary for me. I think we already kind of said that.
Yeah.
Not really from a directorial perspective or anything like that. That was pretty consistent throughout the whole thing. I think they did a pretty good job of, this is what we're talking about. This is the case we're doing. a lot of times, and something I didn't really agree with, is they would go to these areas where these crimes occurred, and then they would knock on the freaking doors of these places where some of these crimes happened, and they were like, oh, do you know anything about this crime? Well, you want to know there was this girl murdered in your house?
Yeah, there was that like, little old couple. Oh my God. And they were like, oh no, we won't tell you. And they're like, no, tell me. I want to know. And they're like, oh yeah, some girl was murdered in your house.
Well, that was the old lady. No, that was the old lady. It was
with their husband too, because he said that people had walked up or driven up their street asking, oh, was that the house that the girl was killed in?
Yes, but there was one where there was the old lady that wanted to know about it. And
that was the Candyman. Yep, I remember that.
And then the babysitter one.
Yeah.
They go to the person's house, and she's younger.
Yep.
And she's like, no, I don't know anything about it. Then they go to the neighbor's house, and it's the older couple.
Yes.
And they're like, oh, yeah, we know that happened. We've been here forever.
Yep.
But it was that house. And they point to the one where the younger girl was. And I was like, don't come to my house and tell me about all the fucking crazy shit that happened.
No way. And that was something I wanted to touch on, too, was the fact that you could tell, at least earlier on, definitely not once, we got to the clown thing. Like you said, people were saying like, oh, it kind of seemed like someone might be lying, whatever. But like the locals that they asked about in the beginning, especially with the first one, they really started out so strong.
Everybody knew about it.
Yes. And they talked to so many locals and they were like, yeah, I remember the Moonlight murders. I had a family member. I had this or whatever. And everybody knew about it and they knew the legend.
Right. And I think as it got towards the end, it started to peter out.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think it's necessarily because I don't care about the whole John Wayne Gacy thing, but I don't really agree with the Aurora, Colorado shooting connection either. And, I've never really had a fear of clowns. So I don't know if like I didn't connect with this because I didn't have a personal connection to it. Yeah. Whereas I knew about the Moonlight murders. I didn't have a connection with it, but I knew about it.
Well, you have to think like media that you watch, I'm sure.
Right.
Well before our time, you had your Lover's Lane girlies, whatever, but
I mean, but I didn't have a connection with it. So like
the
Lover's Lane I knew about through media and stuff like that. The Candyman I knew about because I actually lived it and my parents were worried about it.
Yep.
Then you had the babysitter thing. I learned about it in media and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure your sister was probably scared too for like babysitting and stuff.
Probably. We'll have to ask her.
Yeah.
But then when you get to the killer clown thing, it's not until I watched it that I was really, not even skeeved out by clowns, but kind of saw them in a different light.
Yeah.
But then it still wasn't something I was worried about. Like, I'm not worried about random clowns hanging around.
No, unless you go back to 2016 and they're just doing weird stuff.
Well, even when they were there, it's not like something that I was afraid of. It was just like these people doing this weird thing.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
So, I don't know. I think that it started out as a great documentary. And after talking about this and going through this episode, I actually think I lower my rating on it.
That's something that I've learned since getting back into reading books is that in the moment, you're like reeling from what you just watched or what you just read. And you're like, oh, I want to give this 5 stars. But then once you sit there and you think about it and, you review it in your head and you're like, oh, well, I didn't really like that. That kind of bothered me. And then you realize like, no, that wasn't a 5-star read or a 10-star watch. That was more of an 8 or that was more of a 4, and you think about it more. So I think it's actually probably better because let me just tell everybody listening, we tried to record this once and John never hit the record button, so we talked into our mics for 40 minutes for funsies.
I did hit the record button, it just didn't record.
Okay, either way.
She watched me do it.
And we had done it literally immediately after we watched the documentary. And I was wicked annoyed, so I was like, F it, we'll do it in like a week. So here we are now recording it, and I'm actually quite pleased that we waited. Obviously, I think we prepared a lot more. We got more information out there for you guys that, if you just like listening to us talk or if you want to watch the documentary yourself, you have a good synopsis and review on what it's about, but also because it's now kind of given us more time to reflect on it and, what we believe
I think
our true rating is.
Yeah, I think that you need to take some time after ingesting something.
Yeah.
Whether it be, media or a meal or whatever, to really reflect on it because you're always kind of caught up in it at the beginning.
Yeah.
So to kind of get to our ending, right?
Yep.
Overall, for what it was, I think the documentary was well done.
I agree. Yep.
I was pretty skeptical at the beginning with the amateurish cinematography look, but I didn't find myself checking my watch throughout, which is a plus.
Yes.
So for those that find this kind of thing interesting, if you do want to watch it, after taking time to reflect on everything and talking it out with you and feeling how it kind of, degrades in quality over time, I think that IMDb users have it right, and 6.2 is a pretty good rating for what it is.
Yeah, I think I'm more around like a 6.5, 6.6, I would say, on my rating, because I feel like it did start out really strong, and I was very interested and intrigued during the first one. Then by the Candyman, I was, resonating with it. With the babysitter and the man upstairs, I was like, oh, I knew that case. Like, I wanted to learn more about it, so I was still really interested by then. And then, once we got into the Killer Clowns, it pretty much, like, lost my attention by that point. I would say that's probably, like, the least amount of notes that I took throughout everything, because I didn't really have much to say, and I'm actually very glad that John got to tackle that one, not me.
For what it was.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, it worked out with the ones that we each covered and dove into. It, stuck with the things that he resonated with and the things that he's, like, better at.
Well, I knew a little bit more about Killer Clowns, like you didn't know what Insane Clown Posse was.
That would have never been brought up if I had that topic to cover. So,
all right. So I think, I'm at a 6.2. I'm with the IMDb user consensus.
I'll give it a 6.6.
So yours originally, prior to us talking, what was it before?
A 7.2.
So yours dropped over half a point.
Yes.
Mine almost dropped a whole point. I was at a 7 before we talked about it.
Yeah.
And then after reflecting and thinking about it and spending a little bit more time with it, I'm satisfied with a 6.2. Now, I don't think that should deter anybody from watching it if you're interested in this.
Agreed.
And again, if you have YouTube Premium, you can put this thing on, lock your phone, and just listen to it.
Yeah.
One of the other benefits. It's worth a watch or a listen.
I agree. Yeah, I think
it doesn't take a lot of time. It's an hour and a half, roughly.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, obviously, we told you guys about these crimes and these urban legends, but I am sure all of our listeners out there, you are the type that are just like me. You're consuming as much true crime content as you can. So, if you are interested in true crime, if you are interested in Halloween, if you're interested in anything that's even remotely spooky or weird or
any of these 3+1 urban legends. I mean, I don't think the Killer Clowns is an urban legend.
Or even just the true crime cases. Like the Moonlight murders are unsolved.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we cover. We cover mostly unsolved cases. So,
and also the other girl's unsolved.
Yeah, and Jeanette Chrisman, same thing. And I'm sure Mary Lou Jenkins too, because that guy totally didn't do it.
Yeah.
So, and then you can get more detail on that. You can see these people, via a video versus just listening to us.
Yep.
So I think at the end of the day, I would recommend that you watch it. I think it was...
There's enough time in a day or enough time in a week or whatever where if you're interested in this stuff, I don't think it would be a waste of time.
No.
To either at least listen to it or put it on in the background and pay attention to it, or to dedicate, an hour and a half's worth of time to watch it. I think they did a pretty good job for what they set out to do.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I just think, again, can't say it enough. I think it just dwindled towards the end. But if you want to just watch the first 3, do that.
Yeah, and I mean, if, if Killer Clowns resonates with you...
Skip to the end.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It didn't resonate with us. Some other people, that may resonate with them. And, Killer Clowns may be the best part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and they can be like, I specifically remember this from my childhood or whatever.
Right. And this is just our perspective on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of brings me to the next question is, would people like more reviews like we, watch a movie or watch another documentary or something like that, and we kind of dive into it in this way?
And honestly, this could be like a,
Once a month
random.
type thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, is like a just once a month type thing, even once every other month, if it's something that you like, but you want to have more true crime in your life, cool. But, we would like to know if you guys enjoyed this, if this is something you'd like us to dive into more
regularly, or, do you want us to start a Patreon and do this as an extra and you support us on Patreon?
Yeah.
And we still do our regular true crime stuff every week.
Yep.
But then we do, additional types of content outside of that for the Patreon members.
Yeah, definitely. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Reach out on any social media platform or email us. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes. And if you do watch this documentary, let us know what you thought.
Definitely. And I'd love to know your rating, if you're closer to John's or my rating of the documentary.
I mean, they're not so far off. So let's say, are you closer to a 6 or closer to a 7?
Still the same, but that's all right.
Yeah. And with that, I think we can conclude our Halloween episode.
Yes.
And to all you
ghoulish boys and girls.
Ghouls and girls.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.